Pirates, often romanticized in modern culture, have been a formidable presence in our maritime history from ancient times through to the classical age of piracy in the 17th to 18th centuries. Iconic figures such as Blackbeard, Henry Morgan, and Anne Bonny terrorized the Caribbean Sea and Atlantic Ocean, exploiting the rich trade routes between Europe and the Americas. Driven by factors such as economic depressions, the quest for fortune, and sometimes pure retaliation against harsh naval practices, these maritime outlaws often started as privateers with government-issued permits to attack enemy ships during wartime, but frequently turned to indiscriminate piracy. We've all seen pirates in our popular media, of course, and many of us grew up with admittedly romanticized perceptions of them. But the truth is, we rarely get to hear the real stories of who these pirates actually were. So, today, allow me to guide you through a few of them. We're going to be talking about Bartholomew Roberts, William Kidd, Calico Jack, and Mary Read. And this is part 1 of the video. If you do leave a nice comment below, then perhaps you'll convince me to make part 2. We'll see how many people want that. But before we begin, allow me to give you the traditional welcome to the channel, as I'm much obliged to do so. Welcome to the channel. If you are new here, it's great to have you with me. And if you're coming back, well, off we go on another little adventure into the past together. As always, if you want to support the channel, this is how you do it. Just enjoy the content at your own pace. A like and subscribe also greases the wheels, and if you want to go further than that, I refer you to the video description. Now, with that out of the way, let us begin with Bartholomew Roberts. Bartholomew Roberts, originally named John Roberts, was born in 1682 in Casnewid Bark, Pembrokeshire, Wales. His father was likely named George Roberts. The reasons behind this change of name to Bartholomew still remain a little unclear, but it was common among pirates to adopt aliases, possibly to avoid persecution, and sometimes to create a fearsome identity. But in Robert's case, it's believed that he might have taken inspiration from the infamous buccaneer Bartholomew Sharp. We'll talk about him in another video. Now, Robert's maritime career began at a very young age, 13 in fact, though records of his early seafaring activities are admittedly scant until 1718, when he emerged as the mate of a Barbados sloop. Now, by 1719, he had ascended to the position of second mate aboard the slave ship Princess under Captain Abraham Plum. The ship's journey took a dramatic turn in early June of that year, while anchored at Anumabu on the Gold Coast, which is modern-day Ghana in Africa, when it was overtaken by pirates sailing on the Royal Rover and the Royal James. These pirates were led by one Welshman, Howell Davis, who recognized Robert's talent in navigation and began consulting him on various matters, often communicating in Welsh to maintain secrecy from the predominantly English-speaking crew. Initially reluctant to join the pirate crew, Roberts soon perceived the benefits and freedoms that the pirate life afforded compared to the harsh conditions and low pay of legitimate maritime employment, which was just not as fun. He was quoted by Captain Charles Johnson in the work A General History of the Robberies and Murders. What a book. I bet that sold a lot back in its day. Of the most notorious pirates, expressing a preference for the pirate life, stating, "In an honest service there is thin commons, low wages, and hard labor. In this, plenty and satiety, pleasure and ease, liberty and power. And who would not balance creditor on the side, when all the hazard that is run for it at worst is only a sour look or two at choking? No, a merry life and a short one shall be my motto." Hard to argue with that, isn't it? Well, this philosophy soon became emblematic of his approach to life on the high seas, leading him to become one of the most notorious pirates of his time. So, Bartholomew Roberts' transition from a lowly paid seaman in the merchant navy to a feared pirate captain was swift and dramatic. His previous wage in the merchant navy was less than £4 a month. Doesn't sound like much, but it was a modest sum for the day, especially given the lack of opportunities for advancement such as promotion to captaincy, which likely contributed to his eventual embrace of piracy. Of course, when it comes to promotion, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Some things never change. But the turning point in Robert's life came shortly after he was captured by those pirates. The pirate ship Royal James was soon abandoned, however, due to worm damage, and the crew, including Roberts, continued on the Royal Rover. The captain at the time, Howell Davis, deceitfully entered the harbor of the island of Principe by flying the flags of a British man-of-war. Davis's plan to kidnap the governor for ransom backfired when the Portuguese, having discovered their true identity, ambushed and killed Davis. Well, in the chaotic aftermath, the pirate crew needed to choose a new captain. I'm sure you can see where this is going. Leadership fell to Roberts not long after his unwilling induction into piracy, largely due to his navigational skills, and also a little bit of his forceful personality. His election was somewhat extraordinary given his initial reluctance to join the pirates. Oh, and by the way, pirates did practice quite a bit of democracy. They would vote on things and make decisions as a group. It wasn't always just the strongest survive. It was pretty fair and equal in a lot of senses. Of course, this depended on the pirates, but we're talking about generalizations now. Well, Roberts reportedly accepted the captaincy with a bit of resignation, remarking on the necessity of embracing his role as a pirate if he was going to be one at all, famously stating it was better to be a commander than a commoner. Robert's first major act as captain was a vengeful attack on the island of Principe to avenge Davis's death. Under the cover of darkness, Roberts and his crew killed a significant portion of the male population and looted valuable items. His boldness continued as he captured a Dutch Guineaman and shortly thereafter a British ship named the Experiment. After resupplying at Anamboe, the crew held a vote and decided their next venture would be towards Brazil. This series of successful and daring exploits earned Roberts the respect and unwavering loyalty of his crew, and they began to view him as, I quote, pistol-proof, believing that their fortunes were best served under his audacious leadership. So, Roberts and his crew's adventures across the Atlantic epitomize the bold and daring nature of pirate life during the Golden Age of Piracy. After crossing the Atlantic, they utilized the uninhabited island of Ferdinando for essential maintenance of their ship, a process involving cleaning and repairing the vessel below the waterline. This is known as boot topping in naval speak. Well, despite spending around 9 weeks off the Brazilian coast without sighting a single ship, their fortune changed dramatically when they encountered a fleet of 42 Portuguese ships anchored in Todos os Santos Bay, under the expectation of an escort of 2 men of war to Lisbon. Robert's audacious nature shone through as he took control of one vessel from the fleet and coerced the master to identify the wealthiest ship. The target was the Sagrada Familia, a richly laden ship armed with 40 guns and crewed by about 170 men. The capture of this ship proved to be immensely profitable, as it carried 40,000 gold moidores and royal jewelry destined for the King of Portugal himself, including an exceptionally valuable diamond-set cross. Pretty good for a day's work. It's no wonder people chose piracy over the £4 a month that the Royal Navy were offering. Following this significant capture, Roberts and his crew sailed to Devil's Island off the coast of Guyana to revel in their newly acquired riches. Their stay there was unfortunately cut short as they pursued further prizes near the river Suriname, capturing a sloop, because we all know when you're on a roll, you can't stop. Well, Robert's trust in his crew, however, was betrayed by Walter Kennedy, who absconded with the rover and the remaining loot, while Roberts was away chasing another vessel. Undeterred, Roberts and his remaining men took to the newly captured sloop, which they renamed Fortune. They drafted a new set of pirate codes, which every crew member swore to uphold on a Bible, reinforcing discipline and loyalty among his ranks. This reorganization underlines the pirates' community's structured approach to their lawless lifestyle, a kind of controlled anarchy, I suppose we could say. While the pirates' notoriety kept growing, prompting armed responses. In late February of 1720, when confronted by 2 well-armed ships from Barbados, Robert's crew faced robust resistance. The Sea King fled early in the encounter, and the Fortune eventually broke off after taking considerable damage, managing a narrow escape. This brush with defeat, however, did little to curb Robert's resolve. Instead, it stoked his desire for revenge against the forces that had opposed him. He vowed retribution against Barbados and Martinique, symbolically represented by his new flag depicting him standing over the skulls labeled ABH and AMH, signifying a Barbadian's head and a Martiniquean's head. Robert's reign on the high seas reached new heights as he ventured towards Newfoundland, demonstrating both his strategic skill and ruthless nature. In Newfoundland, Roberts and his crew raided Canso, Nova Scotia, and captured numerous ships around Cape Breton and the Newfoundland Banks, including a dramatic takeover of the harbor of Fairyland. Here he seized a dozen vessels, showing once again his prowess and instilling fear into the local maritime community. The most notable of these conquests occurred on June the 21st, when Roberts entered the harbor of Trepassy with black flags flying, a clear sign of his pirate intentions. He found a fleet of 172 ships, all of which were quickly abandoned by their frankly terrified crews. Roberts, displaying a mix of strategic cruelty and psychological warfare, captured all 22 merchant ships in the harbor, and he expressed disdain for the captain's cowardice and forced them to attend to him each morning under threat of burning their ships if they failed to appear. In a display of utter dominance and to prevent any pursuit, Roberts did end up burning all of the vessels upon his departure, except for one brig from Bristol, which he commandeered and armed with 16 guns, renaming it Fortune. He continued his campaign of terror through July, capturing up to 10 French ships and commandeering one, which he refitted with 26 cannons and renamed it Good Fortune. This enhanced firepower allowed him to seize many more vessels as he headed towards the West Indies. Roberts' fleet, now including Good Fortune and Montigny La Palisa's sloop, which had rejoined them, continued their marauding ways through the Caribbean. In September of 1720, Good Fortune was repaired and renamed Royal Fortune. It's quite an upgrade, isn't it? The first of several ships Roberts would bestow with this name. The renamed ship and the Fortune entered Basse Terre Road on St. Christopher's Island with such an imposing presence that they faced zero resistance from the garrisons there. Nobody dared fire upon them. Robert's reputation grew even more formidable when he reportedly captured Florimond Horold de Montigny, the governor of Martinique, although this event is debatable by some historians and considered an outright embellishment by some. Well, regardless of the veracity of this particular tale, Robert's actions during this period almost brought seaborne trade to a standstill in the West Indies, showing his significant impact on regional commerce. As Robert's fleet set sail for West Africa in the spring of 1721, his associate Thomas Anstis took command of the Good Fortune and parted ways to continue raids in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, Robert's Royal Fortune continued towards Africa. Robert's pirate operations continued relentlessly across the Atlantic and along the African coast. By late April, after the Royal Fortune was found to be leaky and abandoned at Cape Verde Islands, Roberts and his crew commandeered the Sea King, renaming it to the new Royal Fortune. This renaming marked a continual legacy of Robert's flagship names as they ventured towards the Guinea coast. In early June, near the Senegal River, Roberts showed his naval skill by capturing 2 French ships after a chase. These ships, one armed with 10 guns and the other with 16, were renamed Ranger and Little Ranger, with Thomas Sutton and James Skirm appointed as their captains respectively. Robert's fleet then sailed to Sierra Leone by mid-June. Here he encountered John Old Crackers Leadstone, a retired pirate who informed him of the Royal Navy's plans with HMS Swallow and HMS Weymouth expected to return to the region by Christmas. Despite this looming threat, Roberts continued his operations unabated, capturing 2 significant ships at Point Kestos in Liberia on the 8th of August. One of these was the Onslow, a frigate transporting soldiers bound for Cape Coast Castle. The soldiers aboard were given an opportunity to join the pirates, albeit at a quarter of the usual pay due to their lack of sailing experience. The Onslow was then converted into the fourth Royal Fortune. As 1721 drew to a close, Roberts and his crew took time to careen their ships and relax a little bit at Cape Lopez and the island of Annobon. During this period, leadership changes occurred, with James Skirm replacing Sutton as the captain of the Ranger. The new year saw Roberts intensifying his piracy. In January of 1722, he sailed out into Whydah Harbor, where their fearsome reputation was such that 11 ships at anchor surrendered without a fight. Roberts demanded and received a ransom of 8 pounds of gold dust per ship. However, one shipmaster's refusal to comply led to a tragic and brutal display of Roberts' ruthlessness. His crew set the dissenting ship on fire, leading to the horrific death of about 80 enslaved Africans that were inside, either by fire or subsequently by drowning, and if they didn't drown, they would have surely been eaten by the sharks. Not good. Well, on the 5th of February 1722, Captain Challoner Ogle of HMS Swallow cleverly approached Bartholomew Roberts' pirate fleet at Cape Lopez, with the Royal Fortune, Ranger, and Little Ranger were undergoing careening. Initially, Ogle's maneuver to veer away from a shoal led the pirates to misjudge Swallow as a merchant ship attempting to escape, a misconception Ogle might have encouraged as a tactical ruse. Seizing what they thought was an opportunity, the pirates on the Ranger, led by James Skirm, pursued the Swallow. However, once they were isolated, Swallow revealed her true intent by opening her gun ports and unleashing a devastating broadside. The surprise attack resulted in the death of 10 pirates. Captain Skirm was gravely injured, losing a leg to a cannonball, which is very stereotypical of pirates, you must admit. Well, despite his severe injury, Skirm heroically remained on deck, but the overpowering firepower from the Swallow eventually compelled the Ranger to surrender, leading to the capture of its surviving crew. 5 days later, on February the 10th, the Swallow returned to Cape Lopez to confront the Royal Fortune. Unknown to Roberts, his crew had captured the ship Neptune the day before, and many of his men were incapacitated, well, mainly from excess drinking. Once again, pirate stereotypes. Initially mistaking the Swallow for the returning Ranger, Roberts and his crew were caught completely off guard. It was only when a deserter from the Swallow recognized the approaching ship and alerted Roberts that the pirates realized their peril. Roberts, who was ever known for his flair, prepared for the battle, dressed extravagantly in a crimson damask waistcoat and breeches, a red feather in his hat, a gold chain with a diamond cross, and armed himself with swords and pistols. As the battle commenced, Roberts' plan was to have the Royal Fortune sail past the Swallow, exposing themselves to only one broadside, which they believed they could survive long enough to make an escape. However, the execution failed when the helmsman could not maintain the correct course. This error allowed the Swallow to close in and deliver a second, more crippling broadside. Tragically for the pirates, a shot struck Roberts right in the throat, killing him instantly. In a final act of loyalty and respect, and fulfilling Roberts' long-standing wish, his crew quickly wrapped his body in the ship's sail, weighed it down, and committed it to the sea, thus preventing his body from falling into enemy hands. Well, the enemy probably would have decapitated him, put his head on a stake somewhere as a warning to other pirates, and, well, nobody wants that happening, don't they? Thus, Roberts' dramatic death marked the end of one of the most notorious pirate captains in history. Now, drawing extensively from A General History of the Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson, whose true identity remains another subject of debate, these descriptions of Roberts paint a portrait of a pirate captain that was both ruthless in his pursuits and principled in his own way. He was described as tall, dark-complexioned, a man nearing 40 years old, embodying both the charisma and terror associated with pirate captains of his time. His personal bravery was undisputed, yet it was applied towards goals that society condemned, which tarnished any potential admiration for his gallantry. He was known to toast darkly to a life free from the hangman's noose, indicating his defiance of the fate that awaited many, and one may say all, pirates. While visually striking, Roberts often donned a red waistcoat paired with scarlet breeches, topped with a scarlet flamingo plume, a costume that may have served to mask blood during the battle, but it also spoke to his flamboyant disregard for subtlety or anonymity. Well, his attire often included a large diamond cross, reportedly seized from the King of Portugal, showing off his success in plunder. And despite the fear that he inspired, he was recognized for his courage and strategic skill, as noted by a New England state governor who couldn't help but admire his bravery following his exploits in Newfoundland. His leadership style was marked by a disdain for cowardice. This was evident when he expressed outrage at the captains who abandoned their ships without a fight in Trepassey Harbor. Interestingly, Roberts diverged from the stereotypical pirate in several ways. He had a noted preference for tea over rum, which is, of course, a little out of character for pirates. And while this has led some to describe him as a teetotaler, which is an old word for somebody who doesn't drink alcohol, evidence suggests that he did consume beer, and perhaps avoided hard spirits like rum when at sea, which is actually quite a wise decision. His approach to the Sabbath also set him apart. He ensured his musicians were given a day of rest, hinting at a more regulated and disciplined life aboard the ship than what might be expected. In terms of his treatment of prisoners, well, that varied. He was not known to be as brutal as pirates such as Francis Spriggs or Edward Lowe. How low can you go? But neither was he as lenient as Samuel Bellamy or Edward England. While he could be harsh, particularly to meet the expectations of his crew, he also showed moments of unexpected generosity, giving gifts to cooperative captains and crews of captured ships. His actions were thus calculated to maintain his authority and the loyalty of his crew, yet he also communicated that his harshness was a choice rather than a necessity. Ultimately, the legend of Black Bart, as he was also named, as portrayed in historical accounts, is one of contradiction. between his personal code and the violent imperatives of his life at sea, between his flamboyance and his discipline, and between his ruthlessness and occasional generosity. And now, I will tell you the life of William Kidd, another famous pirate that doesn't quite often get talked about. I hope you're enjoying this so far. If you are, give it a like and subscribe. Now let's continue. William Kidd, commonly just known as Captain Kidd, was born prior to October 15th, 1654, in Dundee, Scotland. While other birthplaces like Greenock and Belfast have been suggested, Kidd himself testified in 1695 to the High Court of Admiralty that he was indeed from Dundee. His baptism records also support this assertion. After his father's death, a local society in Dundee provided financial support to his family, dispelling myths that his father was actually a minister, as no records from the church in Scotland from that period mention his name at all. As a young man, Kidd moved to New York City, which had recently been taken over by the English from the Dutch. It used to be called New Amsterdam, in case you were wondering. Now, in New York, he became well connected, befriending several colonial governors. Early accounts suggest that he may have served as a seaman's apprentice on a pirate ship before transitioning to a privateer. In 1689, Kidd was part of a French-English pirate crew in the Caribbean under Captain Jean Fantine. After a mutiny ousted Fantine, Kidd and the crew sailed to Nevis, where they renamed their ship Blessed William. Kidd took over as captain, possibly elected by his crew, or appointed by Christopher Codrington, the governor of Nevis. Under Codrington, Kidd's ship defended Nevis from French forces, as the English were at war with France at the time. The governor instructed Kidd and his men to finance their efforts by plundering French territories, leading to the sacking of Mary Gallant. Later, during the War of the Grand Alliance, Kidd captured an enemy privateer off the New England coast, earning a reward for his privateering efforts in the Caribbean. However, his ship was stolen by the pirate Robert Culliford, while Kidd was ashore in Antigua. Back in New York, Kidd contributed financially to the building of Trinity Church. On May 16, 1691, he married Sarah Bradley Coxort, a wealthy young widow who had inherited a substantial fortune from her first husband. On December the 11th, 1695, William Kidd, then a respected privateer, received a formidable commission from Richard Coote, the first Earl of Bellamont, who was the governor of New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Bellamont, acting with the authority of the Crown, tasked Kidd with the mission of hunting down notorious pirates, including Tom Tew, John Ireland, Thomas Wake, and William Mays, as well as gunning down as many French ships as he could. This commission was a crucial moment for Kidd, as a refusal to accept could have been seen as disloyal, and, well, that carries significant social repercussions, of course. Now, the financial backing for Kidd's 1696 pirate hunting adventure came from some of the most influential men in England, including the Earl of Orford, the Baron of Romney, the Duke of Shrewsbury, and Sir John Somers. They covered 4/5 of the expedition's cost. Additionally, Kidd received a letter of marque directly from King William III, legitimizing his actions as a privateer and entitling the crown to 10% share of the loot, because of course the government has to take something. Now the preparations for the voyage were orchestrated by Kidd along with his acquaintance Colonel Robert Livingston, with further financial contributions from the merchant Sir Richard Blackham. To gather the necessary funds, Kidd even sold his old ship, the Antigua. Now Kidd's new ship, the Adventure Galley, with a very fun name, was notably equipped for combat and swift movement, boasting 34 cannons and outfitted with oars to allow maneuverability in calm winds, features that made her ideal for pursuing pirates. Kidd was meticulous in selecting his crew, choosing men he believed to be both skilled but also loyal. However, an incident as the Adventure Galley sailed down near the Thames set a less favorable course for Kidd. He neglected to salute a Navy yacht in Greenwich, a serious breach of maritime protocol. In response, the yacht's crew fired a warning shot. Well, in a brazen display of defiance, apparently Kidd's crew mocked the Navy men by pulling down their pants and mooning them, slapping their backsides and taunting them, which is admittedly quite funny. Well, this act of insolence led to a significant part of Kidd's crew being pressed into naval service by the yacht's captain, a practice generally reserved for ordinary seamen rather than privateers. Kidd was now understaffed, and he sailed to New York, capturing a French vessel along the way, a prize legitimized by his letter of marque. In New York, he recruited additional crew members, many of whom were known criminals and possibly former pirates, to replenish his ranks. Among those who served under Kidd was Hendrik van der Heul, the quartermaster, who was second in command. Van der Heul's background is of particular interest. Described as a small black man, he might have been of African or perhaps Dutch descent, or maybe a little bit of both. This makes Van der Heul a significant figure, potentially, and just potentially, one of the highest-ranking persons of African ancestry to serve as a pirate or privateer during this period. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Van der Heul later transitioned to a legitimate maritime career, becoming a master's mate on a merchant ship, without ever being convicted of piracy. In September of 1696, Kidd set sail from England aboard the Adventure Galley, bound for the Cape of Good Hope and the waters around southern Africa, a known haven for pirates. The voyage quickly soured as the ship, although newly built, began leaking. Oh, and everybody got cholera. When they were on the Comoros Islands, he lost a third of his crew to the disease. Not good. More further misfortune befell Kidd in the waters of Madagascar, where he found none of the pirates he expected to capture. As the financial pressures mounted, Kidd's desperation to salvage the failing venture increased. However, he abstained from engaging with several potential targets, including a Dutch ship and a New York privateer, and later particularly problematic since attacking it would have been a direct violation of his commission by the New York governor. So he decided to leave that New York privateer alone. The game's not really worth the candle on that one. Now, discontent brewed among his crew, leading to desertions and mutinous threats, from those who remained, and the numbers were admittedly dwindling. Things were not looking good for him at all. And thus, the tension aboard the ship reached a fatal climax on the 30th of October 1697 during an encounter with a Dutch vessel. Kidd's gunner, William Moore, pressed him to attack. Now, Kidd, aware of the diplomatic repercussions with the Dutch, especially given the Dutch origins of King William, refused. A heated exchange escalated dramatically when Moore accused Kidd of ruining him and others. In a moment of rage, Kidd struck Moore with an iron-bound bucket and fatally wounded him. That's right, slapping the bucket across his head, and down he goes like a sack of potatoes. It's not the most dignified way to go, but if you know anything about pirates, well, there's certainly worse ways. Moore succumbed to his injuries the following day. Now, this act of violence overstepped the bounds of the considerable authority of the 17th century English Admiralty law granted ship captains, which permitted disciplining crew members, sure, but stopped a little bit short of outright murdering them with blunt force weapons. That was a little bit of a bridge too far, apparently. Well, Kidd's reaction to the incident, as reported to his ship's surgeon, was a dismissive comment about how powerful his connections were in England, and he could pretty much do anything because he'd get away with it. His rich friends would bail him out, not a problem. And it was this incident that marked the significant turning point in Kidd's career, casting him irrevocably into the role of a pirate in the eyes of the world, and beginning his spiral into infamy. Kidd's voyage, that started with noble intentions, soon spiraled. His transformation into a pirate was accelerated by a series of aggressive actions and decisions that could not be ignored by the authorities. In January of 1698, in a bold display of piracy, Kidd captured the Quedagh merchant under French colors. The ship, loaded with valuable cargo from the East Indies, including gold, silver, and silks, was commandeered by Kidd, who found on board a French pass that he hoped would legitimize his capture legally. However, the reality of his actions soon caught up with him as news of this high seas robbery reached England. The English crown, unable to overlook such a blatant act of piracy, classified Kidd as a full-blown pirate, and ordered naval commanders to pursue and seize him. Bring him back alive or dead, but as long as there's a body, breathing or not, it'll be okay. Well, despite these challenges, Kidd met with one Robert Culliford, a notorious pirate who had previously stolen Kidd's ship, the Mocha frigate. And it's here that historical accounts somewhat diverge. Some sources suggest that Kidd chose to ally with Culliford, sharing resources and even toasting to each other's health, getting along like old friends. Others, however, depict a tense encounter where Kidd's crew refused to engage Culliford and threatened to shoot Kidd himself, eventually abandoning him to join Culliford's ranks. Disheartened and betrayed, Kidd burned his worm-eaten ship, the Adventure Galley, to salvage its metal, and continued his journey on the Adventure prize. Kidd's return to the Caribbean was marked by desperation. He repaired his ship at St. Augustine's Bay, but his crew dwindled to a mere 13 loyal members. As he sailed back to North America, he became acutely aware of the precariousness of his situation, specifically excluded from the 1698 Act of Grace, which offered pardons to pirates. Hand yourself in, and no further punishment. No exceptions. Oh well, except you. You're the exception. Bad luck for Kidd, I suppose. Well, this exclusion was largely due to his piracy acts and the political implications of his associations back in England. Well, by the time Kidd reached Anguilla, he knew he was a wanted man, without any hope of pardon. And so, his journey from privateer to pirate was pretty much complete. And no matter which way he looked at it, his fate was sealed. Captain William Kidd's story is a poignant example of how quickly fortunes can change, especially in the volatile world of privateering and piracy. Initially engaged by the English government to hunt pirates, he simply fell victim to the politics and accusations of piracy, and thus his tragic end was marked by betrayal, a trial fraught with irregularities, and ultimately a rather notorious execution. Kidd's journey from respected privateer to condemned pirates shows that thin line between legal privateering and illegal piracy during the 17th century. Well, the political machinations that led to his downfall began when he was given a letter of marque by King William III to target pirates in enemy French ships. However, this was compromised by several factors, including the actions of his crew, the ships he attacked, and the ambiguous nature of his commission. Thus, when the time for the trial came, the complexities of Kidd's legal defense, or the lack thereof, also played a significant role in his conviction. Missing crucial documents, like the French passes which could have proven his actions, were within the bounds of his commission, significantly weakened his case. His backers in the government, hoping to avoid the scandal associated with his actions, chose to simply turn a blind eye and not support him during the trial, leaving him without resources or even information. Kidd's execution itself was almost theatrical in its cruelty, with the rope breaking on the first attempt to hang him, only to be followed by a successful second attempt. And let me remind you that even if the rope breaks, that force against your neck, you wouldn't want it. You would really want the rope not to break and hopefully just provide you with a quick and easy journey into the next world. Usually when people would get hung, the neck would snap as soon as the impact hit and you would be lights out pretty quickly. Sometimes this didn't happen, but you were certainly crossing your fingers behind your back that it would. Well, this event and even the subsequent gibbeting of his body over the River Thames aimed to serve as a stern warning to others who might consider a similar path. In the aftermath, the discovery of the previously missing French passes in the 20th century brought a new perspective to Kidd's claims as legitimacy as a privateer. These documents suggested that his piratical reputation might have been the result of political convenience rather than any actual guilt. But either way, his story has since become kind of a legend, encapsulated in songs, literature, and folklore. And of course, like with many pirate stories, blurs the lines between fact and fiction. But in my opinion, that's what makes it so fun. Okay, you'll admit by now we're having a good bit of fun, so let's keep going. The next one we've got for you is Calico Jack. You may have heard of him. He's also known as Jack Rackham, but he was known as Calico Jack for his preference for brightly patterned fabrics. He was a pirate that rose to fame during the early 18th century, right smack bang in the middle of that Golden Age. Now, his life prior to piracy is shrouded in mystery, with the first notable mention occurring in 1718, when he served as a quartermaster aboard Charles Vane's brigantine, the Ranger. Operating from New Providence in the Bahamas, a haven for pirates, and actually dubbed the Pirates' Republic, Rackham and his crew engaged in numerous acts of piracy. In the autumn of 1718, Rackham's tenure with Vane reached a pivotal moment. After seizing several ships outside of New York City, they encountered a formidable French man-of-war. Vane chose to evade the larger ship, citing caution as his rationale. But Rackham vehemently disagreed, insisting on a bold attack on the French ship, arguing that it likely held vast treasures, and if they could manage to capture it, would offer them a significantly more powerful vessel. It was definitely worth the gamble, at least in Jack Rackham's eyes. His audacious spirit resonated with the majority of the crew, and only 15 of about 91 men sided with the more cautious Vane. Rackham's charisma and daring proposal led to a vote on November 24, 1718, which resulted in Vane being branded a coward and deposed from command. Well, the mob has spoken. Thus, Rackham was elected the new captain in his stead. Better luck next time to Vane. Well, demonstrating a degree of fairness even among pirates, Rackham allowed Vane and his loyalists to depart on a smaller ship from their fleet, sufficiently equipped with ammunition and provisions. Well, Jack Rackham, now captain, notably shifted his piratical strategy to include targeting smaller vessels along coastal waters, capitalizing on their vulnerability. His tactics proved effective, as he and his crew managed to commandeer the Kingston, a small Jamaican vessel, which they boldly converted into their new flagship. Over time, Rackham's fleet expanded with several captures in the West Indies, including notable successes off Bermuda. In 1719, a pivotal year for Rackham, he and his crew sailed into Nassau, Bahamas. Here they took advantage of a general amnesty for pirates, which allowed Rackham to secure a royal pardon and a commission from Governor Woodes Rogers. Now, Rogers, who was appointed to suppress piracy and restore order, provided Rackham with a chance at redemption. This pardon was a significant turning point, given Rogers' robust mandate to curtail pirate activities that had increasingly plagued the British maritime commercial system. However, Rackham's commitment to his pardon was short-lived. Old habits die hard, you see. In December 1719, he captured the merchant ship Kingston, laden with valuable cargo. Unfortunately for Rackham, the capture of the Kingston occurred within sight of Port Royal, prompting a swift reaction from the local merchants. They were understandably upset, to the point where they were outraged, and they financed bounty hunters who pursued Rackham, catching up with him in February of 1720 at the Isla de los Pinos near Cuba. Now, although Rackham and most of his crew evaded capture by hiding in the woods, they lost both their ship and the Kingston to their pursuers. So they were pretty much back to square one. A striking episode recounted by Captain Charles Johnson in his 1724 seminary work, A General History of the Robberies and Murders. What a cool book. Of the most notorious pirates. Further illustrates Rackham's cunning and resourcefulness. The story goes that while refitting a small sloop in a Cuban town, Rackham noticed a Spanish warship and a captured English sloop entering the harbor. Well, due to the low tide, he was unable to engage them. So, the Spanish awaited high water to apprehend Rackham. Seizing the opportunity under the cover of night, Rackham and his crew rowed to the English sloop, overpowered the Spanish guards, and commandeered the vessel, getting them before they could get to the pirates. By dawn, as the Spanish warship attacked the now abandoned pirate sloop, Rackham and his crew silently sailed away in the newly acquired ship, just straight out of the harbor like they owned the place. Pretty smart, don't you think? Well, returning to Nassau, Rackham and his men were confronted with the need to justify their actions. They presented themselves before Governor Rogers, claiming coercion into piracy by the notorious Charles Vane. Sympathetic to their plight, and harboring animosity towards Vane, Rogers chose to believe Rackham's account, granting him and his crew the royal pardon once again. So, I suppose one can say that their plan was certainly not in vain. I've been waiting to make a joke about his name. There it is. It's the best you're getting. Now, after securing his pardon, Rackham remained in Nassau, where he began a notorious affair with one Anne Bonny, who was also the wife of James Bonny, a sailor working under Governor Woodes Rogers. Anne was known for her fiery spirit and unconventional demeanor, qualities that drew Rackham's attention. When James Bonny discovered the affair, he was not very impressed, and he brought Anne before Governor Rogers, who then ordered her to be whipped on charges of adultery, a punishment reflecting those strict moral codes of the time. Well, unwilling to part with Anne, Rackham proposed a divorce by purchase to James Bonny, a common practice at the time where a man could buy his way out of an unwanted marriage. James Bonny, however, vehemently refused the order. This refusal led Anne to make a decisive break from her past. She fled Nassau and joined Rackham on his pirate adventures, thus marking the end of Rackham's brief stint with legitimacy. Together, Rackham and Anne Bonny, along with the newly assembled crew, stole a sloop owned by John Ham and resumed their life of piracy. They sailed through the Caribbean, capturing other pirate ships and augmenting their crew by offering membership to those they defeated. Well, this period was marked by a spree of maritime crimes that solidified their reputation in pirate lore. During this time, Anne Bonny also became pregnant. She temporarily left the pirate life and returned to Cuba to give birth. Meanwhile, Rackham was busy doing the work that he had to do and continued on his pirate endeavors. In late 1720, Calico Jack Rackham's career as a pirate was nearing its dramatic conclusion. By September, Governor Woodes Rogers of the Bahamas had officially labeled Rackham and his crew as full-blown pirates, formalizing the warrant for their arrests in October. This action set pirate hunter Jonathan Barnett and former pirate Jean Bonadvis on their trail, determined to capture the notorious Rackham, who was then actively plundering along the northern coast of Jamaica. Rackham's reckless behavior continued as he cruised near Jamaica, capturing small fishing vessels and instilling fear among the local fishermen. His boldness led him to anchor near Negril, where a fateful encounter with Barnett would seal his fate. On the night of October 31st, 1720, very spooky, Rackham's sloop was spotted by Bonadvis, who informed Barnett of their location. When Barnett approached and challenged Rackham to identify himself, the brazen reply, "John Rackham from Cuba," was quickly followed by a defiant refusal of surrender and the firing of a swivel gun. Barnett retaliated with a devastating broadside that crippled Rackham's sloop, leading Rackham and his crew to desperately call for quarter. The pirates were captured and taken ashore at Davis's Cove near Lucia, Jamaica, where they were arrested by Major Richard James of the local militia. They were subsequently transported to Spanish Town, Jamaica for trial. In November 1720, Rackham and his crew faced trial and were convicted quite swiftly of piracy. The verdict was as grim as it was expected. They were sentenced to be hanged. Rackham's life thus came to an end on November 18, 1720, when he was executed in Port Royal. His body was then gibbeted on a small islet at the entrance to Port Royal, known henceforth as Rackham's Cay, serving as a stark warning to those who attempted to mimic his life. The aftermath of Rackham's capture and execution in November of 1720 triggered a series of trials that underscored the harsh penalties for piracy during the era. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, which we'll get to in a moment, two of Rackham's most notorious crew members, leveraged claims of pregnancy to delay their executions, and this was a common practice that afforded them a temporary reprieve under the plea of belly. At least that was what the legal defense was known as. But Mary, well, she succumbed to illness likely related to childbirth in the April of 1721, dying in her cell at Fort Charles. Anne Bonny, on the other hand, well, her fate remains a little shrouded in mystery. Historical records, or at least the ones that we have, perhaps there's some we haven't looked at yet, well, they don't conclusively detail her release or execution, which leads to much speculation about her ultimate destiny. Alongside Rackham, several of his crew faced the gallows too. George Featherston, the ship's master, Richard Corner, the quartermaster, and crew members John Davis and John Howell were executed on the same day as Rackham in Port Royal. Additional crew members, including Patrick Carty, Thomas Earl, James Dobin, and Noah Harwood, met a similar fate the following day in Kingston. Further trials ensued the day after Rackham's, leading to convictions of John Old Dad the Cooper Fenwick and Thomas Bourne for separate acts of mutiny committed earlier in the year. And thus the legal repercussions extended even to the following year. In January of 1721, 9 men associated with Rackham's crew were also convicted of piracy. Their sentencing carried out in February showed the severe crackdown on piracy by colonial authorities, who had by this point simply had well enough of it. John Eaton, Thomas Quick, and Thomas Baker were hanged at Gallows Point in Port Royal, while John Cole, John Howard, and Benjamin Palmer faced execution in Kingston. The outcomes for Edward Warner and Walter Rouse and John Hanson remain undocumented, but, well, we can speculate that they were hung or faced some grim death in a prison cell somewhere. Probably dysentery. That was pretty popular at the time. Alright, and now let's talk a little bit about Mary Read. I mentioned her a little bit in the last story, but I'm going to just briefly talk about her life for a few minutes. Now, Mary Read's life is a series of events shaped by necessity and survival, dressed often in the guise of a man. Now, her early years were marked by deception and hardship, her mother widowed by the loss of her sailor husband who vanished at sea, faced dire financial strains. The death of Mary's older brother compounded her mother's desperation, prompting her to guise young Mary as the boy to continue receiving financial support from the boy's paternal grandmother. Time for a haircut, I suppose. Well, this ruse did work for some time, allowing them to scrape by on the grandmother's charity. But by the age of 13, Mary took the bold step of maintaining her male guise to seek actual employment, initially as a footboy and later aboard a ship, thrusting her into a life at sea. The transition marked the beginning of her seafaring adventures and her eventual engagement in military service. Thus, Mary's time in the British military, and later in a regiment allied with Dutch forces against the French, showed her bravery and skill in combat. However, the rigid structures of military promotion, which favored purchase over merit, blocked her path to advancement. And her life took somewhat of a romantic turn when she fell in love with a Flemish soldier while serving in Flanders. The marriage led to a brief period of settled life as innkeepers near Breda Castle. But sadly, the death of her husband plunged her back into military life, and with peace diminishing opportunities for advancement, she found herself setting sail for the West Indies. Her journey took an unexpected turn when her ship was captured by pirates. But lucky for her, her male disguise served her well, allowing her to integrate with the British crew members who had been taken aboard the pirate ship. Now, this twist of fate introduced her to the pirate life that would define her later years, alongside the likes of Anne Bonny and Calico Jack Rackham, forging a reputation as one of the most formidable female pirates in history. And thus her pirate career paints a vivid picture of life on the high seas where societal norms were about as fluid as the waters. After willingly joining a pirate crew, Read accepted the king's pardon around 1718-19, momentarily aligning herself with the laws as a privateer, before just getting bored and returning to piracy through mutiny. Well, everyone's got to have a life outside of home, don't they? Her association with the infamous Calico Jack began in earnest in 1720. Now, the dynamic among Rackham, Read, and Bonny was complex, to say the least. Rackham, initially unaware of Read's true gender, was part of a crew that stole the armed sloop named William from Nassau, a pivotal act that solidified their bond as pirates. The relationship dynamics aboard the ship took a turn when Bonny, who was attracted to Read, disclosed her gender to her, under the assumption that Reed was male. Now, to maintain harmony and dispel any arising jealousy from Rackham, Bonny revealed Reed's true intention to him. The dual identity of Reed and Bonny as female pirates in a predominantly male environment raises intriguing questions about gender roles and identity during this golden age of piracy. The practicality of wearing breeches and adopting male attire could simply be seen as necessary guise for survival and acceptance in the harsh world of piracy. Now, this choice of clothing beyond its practical benefits allowed Reed and Bonny to fully integrate and participate in pirate life, unbounded by the typical constraints faced by women at the time. And thus the account of Dorothy Thomas, a victim of Rackham's piracy, offers a rare outsider's perspective on Reed and Bonny. Her description not only highlights their fearsome demeanor and pirate attire, but also subtly confirms their gender, noting that the largeness of their breasts, despite their masculine presentation. It's usually a bit of a giveaway. I think so, at least. Well, this insight adds a layer of authenticity to the often mythologized portrayals of Reed and Bonny, grounding their legendary status in documented eyewitness accounts. And, well, if you ask me, I think that a few of the crew members among there would have known. You just know. Well, the dramatic capture of Jack Rackham and his crew by Captain Jonathan Barnett on October 22nd, 1720, is a pivotal moment in pirate lore, particularly highlighting the fierce resistance put up by Anne Bonny and Mary Reed. According to various accounts, while Rackham and his men were incapacitated, likely due to heavy drinking, during a party at Negril Port in Jamaica, it was left to Bonny, Reed, and possibly one other crew member to defend their ship against Barnett's assault. This depiction of the event emphasizes the courage and tenacity of Bonny and Reed, contrasting sharply with the alleged cowardice or simple incapacity of their male counterparts. And thus the subsequent trial of Rackham's crew in Spanish Town, Jamaica, resulted in a swift verdict of guilt leading to their execution. But of course, as we've mentioned, Bonny and Reed got a little bit of time off because they were pregnant. Well, Reed's life came to a sorrowful end in prison in April of 1721, a death marked by an entry in the burial records of St. Catherine's Church in Jamaica on April 28th. The absence of any record of her child's birth or survival suggests that she may have died during pregnancy, or that her claim of pregnancy was perhaps strategic, albeit a temporary measure to delay her execution. Well, thank you very kindly for listening to our video today. Pirates. They're very interesting characters, don't you think? And why are pirates interesting? Well, they just are. Indeed. Now I'd like to thank my top-tier patrons. That is Charles, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Wendy, Tim, James, Aaron, and Scott. If you would like to be a top-tier patron, you know what to do. I don't need to walk you through the process. And I think from here we will leave part 1. Perhaps we will do a part 2. It depends if you want me to. If you want me to, you better tell me. And then I will do it. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.